So now let's talk about and formalize some of these linear relationships and other types of relationships. So first, linear relationships. Linear relationships obviously mean that the graph is a line, a straight line. And as we discussed when we talked about sequences, we're also talking about a consistent rate of change. So what does that mean? Some of you may remember this from your algebra classes previously, but we talk about in linear relationships something we call the slope. So the slope just means that we are evaluating the change in the y variable over the change in the x variable, and that it is always the same. So in this graph over here, we have a change in the y variable that is 3 units and a change in the x variable that is 4 units. So we represent that as the fraction 3 over 4, 3/4. Now, a little bit later in the line, we have a change in the y variable that is 6 and a change in the x variable that is 8. So 6 over 8. However, what we know about fractions is that these are equivalent fractions. So 3/4 is the same as 6/8. And if we remember our fractions, we know that we can divide 6 by 2 and divide 8 by 2, and we'll get 3 over 4. Likewise, we can multiply 3 by 2 or multiply 4 by 2, and we get 6 over 8. So these are being equivalent fractions. This means that our rate of change is still consistent. So our slope always has to be the same for a linear relationship. Down here in the other diagram, we can again see that the change in x divided by the change in y is going to give us the slope, and that slope in this case is represented by the letter m. Don't ask me why. Don't ask me why slope equals m, but it does. And the other thing that we notice in this graph is the intersection of the line with the y-axis. And this is what we call the y-intercept. And the y-intercept is represented by the letter B. Again, don't ask me why, but that's the letter that we use to represent the y-intercept. And the y-intercept is the point where the line crosses the y-axis. It's also the point where x is equal to 0. So our x value is equal to 0, and our y value is that place where the line crosses the y-axis. And when we represent that in an equation, we get something that looks like this, otherwise known as slope, intercept, form of the line, because we can see the slope represented by the m, and we can see the intercept represented by the b. So that's our relationship for linear equations. In a next video, we'll talk about quadratic relationships and exponential relationships.